Ready to begin the meeting whenever you are.
We get to look at his
Okay, I see a gray screen, but I'm gonna think he's there, so I'm gonna call the City Commission work session to order. It's December 8th, 2020, about 6:20 p.m. And Ms. Riggs, will you call the roll?
Commissioner Rocky Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Frank O'Donnell.
Here.
Commissioner Denyse McGriff.
Present.
Commission President Rachel Lyles Smith.
Here. So the first item on our agenda is the list of future work session agenda items. Mr. Conkle, do you have anything on this?
Thank you. Just a little bit of a update as it relates to some of the calendaring here. The Public Works Code amendments, after we brought that forward to the commission, that was a pretty big, significant amount of changes in that. So we've tried to break that up and bring it forward in some additional work sessions moving forward. So for example, before the commission meeting next Wednesday, we'll be focusing on what we hope is a manageable, smaller portion of that to get through that at that work session in about 45 minutes before the regular meeting at 7 o'clock. January, we're going to look at the city commission policies. We really like to start moving and having those discussions about the water rate ballot measure and what that might look like. And then additional public code amendments. We've got the IT strategic plan, which we're wrapping up internally here and going to be ready to bring forward to the commission to have a look at. And then we're out into February at that point. The one that we really are, focusing on there too is the stormwater SDC and rate study, as well as the parklets, because that, as you may recall, is going to come due at the end of March. So we're trying to get a little bit ahead of that in February. So those are definitely not going to slide there, hopefully. And then we did work with Wes to get them in to give their annual report, that work session in February as well.
So I have one question. The review of city commission policies, is that scheduled in January because it's a normal annual review? Is there any desire from the commission to move that to later in the year? Or do you want to just, to try to get a full balance of the commission, or just move on? Is there any pressing reason, or is just kind of
No, just revisit it every year. It's.
I'm happy to do it. I just thought I would throw it out and see what other commissioners thought.
Inside that is, it's essentially your operating document as the commission.
I'm fine with leaving it where it is.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I see a nod.
Fine.
Okay. Any other comments on this item from commissioners? Seeing none? All right.
Oh.
Wait.
Commissioner Smith? Is that?
No, I said
okay.
no. I'm good.
Oh.
Okay. All right, so let's move on to discussion items. The first item is the research of potential responses to Senate Bill 1573. Ms. Turway.
Thank you very much. The legislature approved Senate Bill 1573 in Oregon City. The effect of that was to allow a method for some annexations to occur without a vote of Oregon City voters. That decision went to the courts, and on October 13th, Assistant City Attorney Carrie Richter provided a status of the court decision. At that time, the commission asked that she return with some additional questions. So Carrie Richter, Assistant City Attorney, is here to talk to you a little bit further.
Thank you. Thank you, Commission President Lyles Smith and Commissioners. I hope I'm coming back with some answers and not more questions, but the reasons the answers I wanted to respond to were items that did come up at that previous work session. I'm going to just summarize the answers quickly, maybe fill in a couple of holes that occurred to me as I read the memo again today, and then hopefully respond to other questions, and we can talk about follow-up next steps. After that meeting in October, I reached out to the General Counsel for the League of Oregon City, Patty Mulvihill, who worked on the brief for the Corvallis case, and I talked to her about Oregon City's interest in continuing to bird dog this issue and interest in engaging with other cities, partnering with other cities, either ones that have that charter limitation that we talked about or those that don't, seeking to reinvigorate the home rule authority with respect to annexation decisions, and the validity of the city charter. She appreciated my feedback and told me that she would sort of put us on the list. I also reached out to the city attorney for Corvallis and made the same, extended the same invitation, and he told me he would let me know. So I think we've done all that we can there. I do know that the city of Portland, I also talked to Denny Veneer, who is the Constitution attorney expert at the city attorney's office in Portland. And they are working on a charter rights issue with respect to public records and city attorney privilege documents, and that case is being reviewed at the Oregon Supreme Court right now, so there probably isn't an opportunity for us to get involved, and I wasn't sure that that's the same kind of, it has more to do with attorney-client privilege than it does with annexation with respect to boundaries, but the question of the extent of home rule policy-making decision-making authority is relevant there. But the case has been fully briefed at the Oregon Supreme Court, so I don't think that there's an opportunity there, but Patty said she'd let me know as the case progresses. So that's where we are on the sort of reaching out and partnering with other cities to pursue these things. I don't have a sense of whether Jim Brewer is going and Corvallis are going to pursue removing the unless otherwise provided by state law provision from their charter. I will continue to sort of keep my fingers on that and let you know. The second question was raised by Commissioner McGriff and had to do with the question of city authority given its age, whether or not Oregon City, by virtue of its incorporation predating statehood, might have some additional power or authority vis-a-vis the state to determine its own future. And so I provided a little bit of research. This research was based on both my research, my discussion with Denny Veneer, and talking with Bill Kavaisman, who's done some research on Dillon's rule for Oregon City historically. And we weren't able to find a really good foothold. First, we kind of feel, our understanding of the research is that once states came into the union, they sort of subsumed all of the authority that any other smaller entity might have had up until that point. The other thing that I think is a really important feature of home rule or cities' rights they exist by virtue of the Constitution, by the Oregon Constitution, not by virtue of the historic admission, their historic acknowledgement by the state, I guess I should say. And so cities actually got more rights by virtue of the Constitution than they had before the Constitution provided those protections. And so the city actually is in a better position in turn of the century than in 1845 or 1850 or when at, earlier dates. So the other thing that I think is important is that the earliest charter that I reviewed, 1910, I think I said, 1906, that chart, or 1910, excuse me, that charter that I reviewed did not say anything about how to change boundaries. And for the city to have some inalienable right to that determination, it would have to be set forth in the charter somehow. And I just found nothing that got even close to sort of determining boundaries. If before the Constitution, say a pre-1906 charter provision that said something about, the boundaries shall be X, and that was blessed by the legislature under Dillon's rule, then we would have something, perhaps like a negative implication if you took it out, you know? But we're not even talking about taking it out, we're talking about making it bigger. So the boundary, if the city had to was considering adding 5 acres beyond its boundaries, at the time, it would have had to ask the legislature to acknowledge that revised meets and bounds description under sort of the Dillon's rule structure of city authority back then. So I kind of felt like that was a dead end, at least at this point. You know, perhaps there are more rocks to turn over, but I'm not feeling like there are at this point. Where I do think that there is greater opportunity for the city to evaluate its ability to review annexations is with respect to the criteria, the annexation approval criteria. And the annexation approval criteria are set forth in the Oregon City Municipal Code 14.04. In my memo, I explained that they're set forth as factors. The commission certainly has the authority when they're reviewing an annexation to treat those like criteria rather than factors. I was neglected to include in the memo that in May there was a Corvallis case that considered whether or not the annexation criteria remain applicable and controlling, notwithstanding Senate Bill 1573. And this is important because the argument in this May Luba case was that the annexation criteria don't apply, and Luba specifically said that they do apply. So we are free, Oregon City is free to have whatever annexation criteria it wants. And we can draft them as specifically or with as much discretion as you may choose. I tend to think that the criteria we have now are very discretionary. And you know, there is, the city has all kinds of opportunity to interpret the factors that we have today to require a greater showing by applicants, but I also think that the criteria could be worded as criteria. We could say they're criteria and that they all have to be satisfied, and we could provide greater guidance to applicants about what level of evidence or to what level they have to show that they can meet our standards in order to get approved as an annexation. So things like adequate utility, infrastructure planning, questions of funding. Funding is always a hot topic. So things like tree removal. I know we have a factor that talks about that, but we could make that more certain. Obligations to inventory natural resources in advance of annexation. Things like the city's need for the additional land and whether it makes sense for orderly growth. So all of those are examples of additional criteria that we could add into 1404 to put a little bit more meat on the bone. That said, it's important to keep in mind that annexation is one step in a long process of reviews that happen before development occurs. And so there are land divisions and site plan design reviews and all kinds of master planning. All of these additional steps happen before an annexation, before a shovel of dirt gets turned. So it is not as though annexation is the last opportunity a city gets to evaluate the demands of an annexed area. So that's kind of a lot of talking. Sorry, I went too fast probably, but, let me respond to questions or provide greater clarification where I can.
Thank you, Ms. Richter. Really, real quick question. I don't see anything about clear and objective standards, so I assume that's not required for annexation criteria?
Right, clear and objective standards apply to land divisions and, so subdivisions and partitions and applications for housing. They don't apply to annexations or concept planning or zone changes.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'll get started. I don't see any hand raised. I understand the conversation about a home rule in our charter, and I do think we should be following our charter as much as possible, and I understand that whole conversation. However, I also think we have an obligation to do our jobs, and to me, that means fixing this annexation code and working on the criteria. I loved, Ms. Richter, I loved your document because you provided us options of how we can improve this. I think if we are saying we don't want any development and we're not annexing any land inside our UGB, we're one of the few communities that have room to grow. And if we throw up that hurdle, we are sending a very bad message to developers, to people who want to come to our city, who are people who want to live here. And if we want to partner with developers on affordable housing topics, I mean, if we want to work on the housing supply and the housing conversation like we've said we want to, then I'm concerned about us, putting our home rule stake in the ground and just not having the conversation about annexations. I understand the home rule, and I have no problems, going to the legislature and fighting that battle of saying protect home rule. But at the same time, when I see our criteria for annexations and the wall that we've put up for development, I have a real problem with that. I think Ms. Richter laid out a lot of ideas and a lot of ways that we can shape the policy of annexation so that we're more comfortable with those annexation applications that come in, so that they meet a rigorous criteria of what we think. I would be interested in hearing from the other commissioners, if we have this conversation, what are those criteria? What are the things that give you real heartburn that would keep you from annexing property, a development into the city? So anyway, I just think it's a good conversation to have. Ms. Richter, I appreciated your staff report. I thought, or your memo, I thought it laid out everything really well. I thought you did a great job. And it provided some stuff for us to think about on how we can, to me, this comes down to a policy question on annexation. I'd like to pause the home rule conversation and think about annexation by itself, and how do we want annexations to be looked at and addressed from a policy perspective in Oregon City. So I'll leave it at that. Commissioner McGriff, I think you had your hand raised.
Yes, of course you would know that I would have some comments about this particular item. So my first question doesn't have to do so much with home rule, but I am curious as to why we do not have a copy of the 1895 charter. We should have that. So have you done any research or talked to OHS to see whether they have it, or the Secretary of State's office, or the archives? Because we should have that.
We should have copies of the charter, and we may. I have not had time to look for them.
Sure.
I apologize.
So, but anyway, yeah, what I inferred from this was that we didn't know whether we had it or not.
I think Carrie Richter was saying that she didn't know if we had it or not, because she has asked me to look for it, and I haven't had time to.
Anyway, on a historical side, I would love to see that, but that's just my history side of me. So what I want to be very clear about is that I am not, in a broader sense, opposed to property being annexed into the city of Oregon City. My concern stems from, and what gives me heartburn, is the criteria about the adequacy and availability of public facilities and services. So just saying that we have a master plan that says sometime in the future, we can serve it, does not answer that question. The question is really much more, in my opinion, a deep dive as to whether we have the capacity to do it. Just be-
Anytime in the next 5 years? or
Right,
10
or,
years,
yeah, or the next 6 months or the next 5 years. And what I get heartburn about is the potential for the city to be placed into a financial conundrum that we can't get out of because somebody wants to develop and we don't have the capacity, regardless of what our plans say, financially to do that.
Right.
And that's what gives me heartburn. Annexations are a natural process of development and growth. Obviously, I liked the statement in her memo that talked about orderly. I get heartburn when we have a boundary and the property that wants to annex is at the very edge where we don't have any way to serve it. And somehow or another, we have to look at an orderly fashion. This is why I was asking our illustrious Public Works Director to look into, I can't remember now if it was Tualatin or Tigard, because I can't remember now which city it was, that had a process by which they looked at, here's the city, here's another ring where we can provide services. Here's the third ring where, yeah, we will provide services, we don't know when. And so if you want to develop and you're in the outer ring, then we will make a provision for you to front all of those infrastructure improvements and then you'll get paid back over time. And I thought what the basic research that I did on that caused me to really do some deep thinking about the orderly provision of public facilities and services and the adequacy. We're going to have some discussions later on about water. That's the big one. That's the big elephant in the room. But it also has to do with sewer. Knowing the topography of our community, we've got some challenges. There's no doubt about that. The other thing that also gives me heartburn is the whole issue, which we have in number 5, which is, in this on page 3, which talks about natural hazards. I know this is going to cause some angst, but there are some places in our community that probably should just not be developed because they have issues. And there ought to be a way that we can do some trading or transfer development rights to another area where it can be and leave those areas alone. And, Newell Creek Canyon, let me just beat the dead horse, is one of those areas where we should be really looking at doing that type of thing. So I agree with you that this is strictly a policy question. It is a financial question in my mind as well. I have no problem with asking the question of the OC 2040 group, but I don't necessarily want to be confined by that. I would like to hear comments about that. I would like to hear comments that relate to, how to say this, the bigger picture without any attachment. So if we're looking at annexation in the broader scale, not whether I own property or gee, I could develop this, but looking at it from a bigger picture, maybe a high level, and looking at those two questions, adequate services and finance. I mean, to me, the financial part is the deal breaker. But it doesn't have to be, if we can figure out a way to do it so that costs are spread equitably and evenly. So that's my Tums moment, as I would say.
And I'll say, I totally agree with you, and the things you're talking about is putting some meat on the bones of our factors. Like, we could really improve. When I read those factors in the staff report, I was like, oh my gosh. One, I don't particularly like things that are super discretionary. I think that's allows the city to get into some hot water sometimes, or you open yourself up to more challenges. But yeah, I agree with you. Commissioner O'Donnell, I believe you had your hand up next.
Sure. I would say that my position is more aligned with Commissioner McGriff's and our commission president. I feel that the community has spoken loudly and clearly many times in the past I also feel that I don't want to consider this separately from home rule, because I feel the state continues to make inroads into the home rule concept, and this is just one of them. So I won't separate the two. And I thought Ms. Richter's report was quite excellent. I thought the critical services component, which is one I always consider, and the timing on the provision of those, I thought that I actually was hoping that we would forward some kind of, that she could potentially forward some kind of verbiage that says if we were to structure something, it would look like this, and I would take my lead from the city of Sandy. I also liked her reference to the timing of when things occur. I mean, things that currently occur at the zoning phase, maybe they need to occur at the annexation phase. So I was hoping for a rough or preliminary draft of whatever changes that need to be made that would strengthen our position to be self-determining, which could also be viewed as home rule. I'd like to see every reason possible, and we can discard those that we don't want, but if we ever end up going before a court, I don't want it to be a one reason stand. I'd like to have the court address as many reasons as possible. If we're going to make the code change, I'd like to implement every criteria that there is. I question, this stuff about being able to provide essential services over some future period. We're always playing catch up, and we understand the nature of SDCs. And I think I'm right in recalling that a builder developer can decide to finance SDCs, I believe, over a 10-year period. So we don't have immediate access to those monies. And I think getting the service aspects taken care of up front and the utility aspects, I think that's huge. So I also feel, I've seen us put things on hold. We had a sewer moratorium. I want to place us in the strongest position possible to make us capable of self-determination in this community. And if I could, I'd put a moratorium on development until we revise these considerations. I don't think that's possible, and I'll defer to Ms. Richter for that. But the critical services component, the timing of the provision of those services, and I would utilize everything that I would learn from other cities, and I would build the strongest thing possible. I also, as harsh as that sounds, I am not opposed to intelligent development, and I want the people that develop to pay the cost of that, whether it be on-site or off-site impacts. So I don't want to talk about it forever. I want to move on it in some form. I'd like to have some piece of verbiage or writing in front of us that says you could approach it this way and then move forward. So, as I said, my commission is probably even to the right of Commissioner McGriff's. I understand our need to contribute to society as a whole, but I also need to protect the interest of this community and make growth be reasonable and controlled. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Donnell. I guess I would say that I think we're all in agreement on that. I don't think that the comments that I said was saying we should arbitrarily go out and develop and not take any of these things into consideration. I was kind of setting the stage for the conversation about the fact that we should be doing better policy development and work on these factors so that we do protect our community and we do these things that Commissioner McGriff said. She went into more detail than I did, but I like your idea. I would just say Ms. Richter was not asked to put together draft criteria or anything like that. I thought she offered these ideas probably which I don't believe we asked her to do that, and I thought it was a great addition to help us brainstorm and talk about this conversation. The other thing I would say is that regarding the timeline, yeah, I do have some questions about that, and maybe when Commissioner Smith talks, we may get to addressing the timeline piece. Commissioner McGriff brought it up about merging this with the OC 2040 conversation, and like Commissioner O'Donnell said, I'm a little concerned about the timeline because I think we're one legal challenge away from an annexation with these, what I consider to be kind of weak criteria that doesn't necessarily protect our community like we would like to, like what Commissioner O'Donnell just said. So I'll circle back on the timeline. Commissioner Smith? You're muted.
I was coughing earlier, so I didn't want to, I turned it off. So I agree with a lot of the comments that have been made. I do think that in our goals coming up through the next couple of years, I think we need to not necessarily tie this process to the 2040, because I do think we need to act on it. And I mean, I agree with creating these criteria and looking at that and having a process to go through that. I think that, the home rule issue is still important, and it always has been. I think it got tied to this so specifically because this was a clear way for, the citizens in Oregon City to say, hey, and we noticed that, that we aren't feeling that we're getting the services that we need from the city, and we don't want to have 100 houses built. And it was very clear that when I first started on the commission, when we were down in terms of police services and officers on duty, that people were clearly voting against the annexation. As we moved into just the recent years, some of those annexations started being approved. Now, they were mostly smaller ones, but it wasn't this, I think there was this thought out there that no one in Oregon City is going to approve an annexation, and that just wasn't true. They were approving them very carefully based on how they felt as citizens their services were being provided. And so it did kind of help protect us in a way and let the citizens kind of speak of how they felt we were providing service. I think that, right now, if this was up to voters, we would have a lot of voters voting against annexations because our deferred maintenance on parks, or because of traffic, or because of whatever. So if there's a way to, deal with some of those criteria in a way that, we really feel capable of being able to continue to provide good service to the existing city and add on to it as we go, because I do think our major concern always has been is this idea of trying to catch up. As a county seat and with all the public-owned land in Oregon City, we have never been able to catch up, and we probably won't unless we really plan a way to deal with that. It's a lot harder for growth to pay for itself in a county seat. So I love this conversation. I think that, the sooner the better that we kind of tackle it, because I think, this does tie in with our conversation about, it does tie in with the 2040 conversation, and it does tie in with our parks conversation and our infrastructure conversations. So it's kind of the right time, but I don't want to necessarily wait for all those other processes to go through to really start tackling this.
Commissioner O'Donnell, is that a new hand raise?
Yep.
Okay.
It's the left hand.
Yep, go ahead.
Excuse me, I'm left-handed.
That's usually a sign of more creative people, so good for you. I feel, we're going to talk about this for a long time, and while we talk, annexation continues. So my question to Ms. Richter is, are we in a position at this point to not entertain annexation, perhaps on the basis of inability to provide critical services? I just feel this is something that needs to happen post-haste. We have a habit of talking things to death. I know that's how you arrive at a good conclusion, but I'd like to plant the first seed and then amend it. So, if this commission could direct Ms. Richter to come forward with a proposal that she feels would put us in the strongest position to make good decisions on annexations, I'd like to see that happen. I just feel we talk, and while we do, time marches on and things continue that we're not quite ready to happen. Thank you.
Commissioner McGriff?
Yeah, I don't disagree with you, Mr. O'Donnell. But I do want to be clear, I did not say I wanted to tie the annexation discussion to the 2040. I said we can ask them the question, but I'm not waiting for them for the answer. But that they may have some comments that would be beneficial to our discussion, but it's purely, in my opinion, a policy discussion. And I have no problem with asking the 2040 group, but I'm not going to tie the implementation or the moving forward to that process, because yes, I agree with you, it will take too long. And I would entertain Commissioner O'Donnell's suggestion if that's something we can legally do. I'm willing to do that. And I'm siding with you.
I think the question is toward Ms. Richter as to whether or not you feel like that is something that you feel like you could put together with research and stuff, or with direction from city staff, or do you feel like, where are you at on that?
So, in answer to Commissioner O'Donnell's question about a moratorium, I don't think we could do a moratorium. I think we could discourage annexation applicants. We could sort of do like what we did with the tree removal. We put on the website that we were discouraging folks from filing annexation applications if they had removed trees during the period until we got that tree criterion in, or factor into the annexation factors. So I think there are strategies that we can use along the lines of what we did with the trees to sort of dissuade and discourage annexations until we can get the criteria on the books. So it won't be a moratorium in the same way we did the sewer moratorium, but I think we could figure out a way. As far as I know, Ms. Turway, I don't think there aren't a lot of annexation applications in the queue right now anyway.
There are not. No, some small sewer stuff, but that's it.
So, so I think that may help a little bit, get us a little time. The question about drafting the criteria, the interesting thing about annexation, unlike other things, you don't have a lot of legal guidance driving what can and cannot be a criteria. The city has a whole bunch of discretion to make sort of whatever criteria you want, and like you all have agreed, it's a policy question. Well, you don't ask the lawyer to make the policy. You make the policy and you give it to the lawyer, and I'll make it look like it needs to be a criterion. So, although I'm happy to write your policy for you, I just don't think that's the right allocation of work, of jobs. It seems to me that the planning department perhaps has some thoughts about how, what that policy ought to be. I worked with Ms. Turway to sort of survey planning directors to get the input we got. And I like the Sandy criteria the best, and so that's why I used it in the memo. We could, go out and survey more cities and get more information that way. But I really feel like it comes down to you all identifying where are the shortcomings in the criteria we have now and how do we address it. And I think that Commissioner McGriff has offered some really helpful thoughts about utility advocacy and financing. And, we could look at this, if you're within, I don't know how many miles of the city you get priority for inclusion, and if you're far on the edge, you don't. So all good ideas. I'm happy to take a shot at it. I'm not sure it's the best for my wheelhouse.
Ms. Turway.
Thank you. I just wanted to chat for a second about timing. This could be quite a project. When we change policies, we want to make sure that we have public engagement and we do things through what ends up being a lot of process. And so I just want to articulate a couple different things. One is that we understand that we have these annexation factors that are very discretionary and allow the commission room to interpret things more stringently if you want to today. So you do have some authority today when things come in to push applicants to have more details about how things will be financed and how things will go. You already have that today, although it's not spelled out in the code because it is so discretionary. As far as workload goes, I just want to acknowledge that we're in the middle of our comprehensive plan update, but beyond that, we're also doing other long-range things aside from the Lamp Falls Legacy projects, the upland habitat trees, mural code, construction excise tax research. So there's a lot of other things, and I know it's not a popular thing to say, but I want to make sure that I prioritize the wants of the commission so that I can achieve them all to the level that they deserve to be done. So I'm feeling a little bit of comfort in knowing that for today, if an annexation comes in, you do have some authority to push applicants to a more stringent place than we have before historically. And I want to make sure that I prioritize some of these projects. I'm sure after the comprehensive plan, there will be more projects. I've heard redoing all of our tree code and other things. So I just want to make sure that with the planning department level, staff of 4, that we are able to deliver the expectations of the commission.
Okay, Commissioner O'Donnell?
Mr. Lewis?
Well, again,
wants to say something.
I think the raw material to fashion an initial swing at this is already in Ms. Richter's memo. I know everyone wants citizen involvement, but I think the time for citizen involvement in this case may come after we put forth a proposal. I mean, we're talking about the need to have expertise provide the input. We've got that between people like Ms. Richter and other land use type people to do that. We fashion it and then we get citizen input. Don't start with people who are uninformed on the issue trying to forge something when we have the necessary expertise to put forth a proposal and then get the citizen input. So I'm all about taking a first swing at it, which can be modified subsequent to that with the citizen input. So if it were up to me, I would direct Ms. Richter to take an initial try at it, and then let's review it and have that discussion in a more fashioned way.
Real quick, Mr. Lewis, are you on screen because you're teeing up for the next item, or do you have comments you want to make on this topic?
The only thing I was thinking of as I was listening was, I know we tend to lean on the water as a obstacle. And all I really want to say is we're in an area where there's 2 service providers, the city and another. And we're also in a county that has a fair amount of resources and seems to favor urban development in the county. So I worry a little bit about leaning on the water concern because there is another service provider out there who would offer to provide that service. We've taken we've heard good commission direction on that. And, I think we want to, what we've heard is, we need to move forward with preservation of our water rights and serve areas that are in the city. But with that said, it's probably not one of the items that we'll be able to lean on too much. In this case, it just seems to me from my perspective, and that's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
I didn't mean to pick on water specifically, Mr. Lewis. I was talking about all of our public facilities, which is our roads, our sewer, water, storm, kind of all of those. Water was sort of the euphemism for all of them.
Okay, so in the interest of time, I'd like to see if we can try to wrap up this conversation because we do have several things on our agenda and PRAC will be waiting on us in another 15 minutes for our joint session. So it sounds like the commission is not in agreement on just putting this off completely until the comp plan OC 2040 update. It sounds like there's a discussion that needs to happen about timing and maybe other criteria that we think should be considered in this policy. I would say I agree with Ms. Richter that I'm not sure that our attorney is the correct person to be writing policy for us. See, that does seem to be backwards. Yes, she's done some research, but typically staff do that, and then she does the legal crafting. I'm wondering, would a potential next step be that since Ms. Turway says that we have tools in our tool shed right now, and we have the ability to have discretion and apply factors to annexations, it makes me question, do we all know what the actual process is? And would it be helpful if Ms. Turway were to come back and kind of go over what the annexation process is and where are all of the points where, like, go into detail, where are all the points where we could consider the annexation application? You know what I mean? Where I feel like we're treating it a little bit like we have criteria, but we don't have any ability, or maybe we don't know where our trigger points are, where we have a review and can actually apply some feedback, or maybe denial. Does that make sense? I don't know, I kind of rambled.
I think
see two
that's
hands.
what Ms. Turway was trying to get to, in that, I think part of the, how you interpret these factors, it is a double-edged sword. Because of the way they're written, there's a significant amount of discretion that's provided to the commission to interpret their code and what they actually mean. And while that does provide for, arguments or, disagreements as to whether that has been met or not, as long as they're justified with facts and to the, that it's not just, we don't want this. It is based on something that is demonstratable.
Right.
And the commission believes that through a vote to be the situation. And there is quite a bit of discretion offered to this commission with it. But, I think what this brings up is just, typically this would go to the planning commission. They would work on it and bring you something. It doesn't sound like you necessarily want to do that. So I guess we're just looking for a little bit of direction as to how to move forward.
That wasn't one of our options in the staff report, to send it back to planning commission and have them work on it, as far as like drafting up a potential.
I'm not totally comfortable with that.
Okay, Commissioner O'Donnell?
Now, we've seen the results of the process as it currently stands, and the result is that annexations continue onward and upward. So I'll make a simple motion. I would like, and I don't consider it policy.
We're not in a public meeting.
No motion.
We're not in a public meeting.
You are in a public meeting.
Yeah, we are in a
You
public
do,
meeting, yes.
at
Yeah,
work
I mean-
okay, sorry about that. I'm looking for, forget that. I would consider,
We're in a work session. Yeah, we're in a public work session.
Continue, Mr. O'Donnell.
I would consider that the raw material for Ms. Richter to compose something to put forward to start as a basis for discussion is already there. So I would like to see something like that formulated to move on. What we've got in terms of our own staff is that we have a bureaucracy that administers laws with somewhat of a discretion. I'd like to nail this down to make this as concise as possible to strengthen our position. So I can't make a motion, as you all just informed me, but I'd like to see her just distill down her memo into possible amendments in terms of what and the timing thereof that would strengthen our position in the future. Thanks.
Could I make a suggestion, Commissioner O'Donnell?
Sure.
It seems to me that I agree with you in concept, because I'm looking at the criteria for Sandy on page 5, and I'm looking at our criteria on page 3, and it seems to me that there could be a melding of those two things
Agree.
that could
We
get,
can learn from others. I
yes,
agree.
get closer to what we're talking about. For instance, our first one says adequacy of access to the site. That, I think that could be, could be beefed up a little bit. Conformity with the proposal, obviously it's got to be conforming with the comprehensive plan, but criteria number 3 could be revised within their A, B, or C. So in my brain, I've kind of rewritten it a little bit, but not on paper. But yeah, I think it's fundamentally a rough draft is there, and from what I'm looking at. Maybe after I eat this entire candy
guess-
bar, I'll go home and I can work on that.
I mean, I agree with you, and I totally want to move something forward. I just don't believe Ms. Richter is the right person to be doing this. This is not an offense to Ms. Richter, but we pay her a very high salary to do legal work, and I don't consider this legal work. I consider this staff work. That's just my personal opinion. If y'all are willing to pay her salary to do staff work. Commissioner Smith?
I don't think it's staff work. I think it's the integration of legal concepts that place us in a strong position. If you want to direct staff to take Ms. Richter's memo and consolidate it into something workable for them, I'm fine with that. But I don't want to walk away from this meeting having done nothing but talked about it.
Mr. Conkle, do you have any comments on staff assignments, guidance on this, since it's your staff that would be?
Yeah, I mean, I'll need to talk with Ms. Turway. I mean, essentially, when I'm hearing the desire to do something quickly. I think that you're gonna run into, you're changing annexation policies that deal with land use and growth within a community. What we've heard before is the desire for public participation and involvement. It does not sound like that's something that we want to go through with this. I do want to talk to Ms. Richter and Ms. Turway. There has always been a discussion whether annexations, they're in Chapter 14 of the Municipal Code. Most of our land use is in Chapter 16 and 17. Is annexation a land use decision, which potentially impacts how we make these code changes? So there's just some things we need to work through. But if it's the direction of the commission that this is the priority that they would like to do, then we're going to rearrange our work schedules, and products that are going to be brought are going to be delayed to deal with this, because I don't think this is a one hearing at the city commission and call it good. I don't know what kind of involvement you want from CIC, Planning Commission, the general public, home builders. They're going to want to be involved through that process.
Commissioner O'Donnell said that he's preferring a draft, a rough draft of something to throw out for people to look at. Rather than, I mean, there's many ways, as you know, I'm a citizen involvement person, and there's many ways to do that. There's the way where you start with 0 and you build up, or you throw something out and say, here, we'd like you to look at this and we'll have a broad discussion about it. So there's a couple of different ways to get at it. I think Commissioner O'Donnell is suggesting the latter. He'd like to draft something to start creating a conversation about it. Am I correct, Commissioner O'Donnell?
You're exactly correct. I was not being dismissive of public involvement. It was like, how do you get started on a fast track to focus the discussion? I felt that the way you just described and I described was the way to focus the discussion. So construct something as the basis for the initial discussions, and then that would accelerate the movement of it forward rather than wander around looking for input from those that are not informed. Let's give them something to start with.
Okay, I think there's general agreement and consensus on that, but the pinch point is going to be the
Gotta get the work done.
prioritization of tasks. So I think that needs to come back to us as far as, I feel like we're providing guidance without knowing the full range of items that we would be pushing off of the plan, our planning department's plate that we may have previously told them was a priority. So I think we need to be fair to our staff who are juggling what we have told them we want them to work on, and if we're trying to rearrange those priorities. So it'd be good to know, what are all those things? I agree. I would love to have some draft item to throw out there for conversation, but it just doesn't stop there. I mean, you got to have the ability to accept public comment. I mean,
Exactly.
this is not just a small thing that we can just whip out of our pocket and think, that it's just going to move through really quickly. So it's going to take staff time and thought and work. And so the other thing I'd like to know about would be consideration of any budget leeway where we could potentially hire a consultant, put out an RFP, get cost estimates on tackling this item as a standalone item. I have no idea, and I don't know if there's any leeway, 20,000, 30,000 in the budget, of something for us to consider to help not put the full burden on our staff, but provide extra resources if we want to make it a priority.
Okay. Yep. So we can go back. We'll have the conversation. I think there's two things. Is one, how do we do it? What are those impacts? But then, I think we do have to have a discussion about what that process is. There is going to be some process, and what that is. I think we'll have to clarify moving forward. I'm mainly concerned about Measure 56, to be honest, and the land use notice that typically goes in. But if we're going to make a determination that this is not land use, because it's an annexation, that changes, I think, some of the process requirements that we have.
Right. Okay. All right, so it is 7:15. This is the time when we're supposed to be starting our second work session. What were the PrAC members told? Are they coming on at 7:15, or they're watching and waiting on us to?
7:30.
7:30, okay, good. So Mr. Lewis, you got like 10 minutes for probably a 30-minute item. I know we're probably gonna go over, but go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you. That, to me, as I was preparing for tonight, I was wondering, how much, the code changes on this topic aren't that lengthy. In reality, they're pretty straightforward. So I wasn't sure how much the commission's actually done, but I'm gonna share my screen and I'm gonna go through what I have in an accelerated format. So hopefully you're okay with that. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so I've got 8 slides, but I'm going to narrow that to even, I'm just going to go through them pretty quickly. Some of it is information that Tony already talked about the schedule and the idea of kind of breaking out our code changes. I do apologize for that. We've got a variety of things that we want to move forward. So if I could get a thumbs up from the commission, we're planning to bring forward the things that are in cyan first, and that's assuming we can get your kind of buy-off on the sewer service, which is what we're talking about tonight. And then the things in green, most of which, these little black check marks we heard from you last time, you were kind of good to go with. So we kind of think that item right there, 1780, is good. If we could resolve the sewer one, I feel like we're okay there, and we would bring that in the form of an ordinance. And then the rest of these, many of which are good, but there's a couple of items which we're wanting to put on work session agendas, or we have already put them on work session agendas. After we were done with that, assuming we got to some resolution, we would package those. And of course, the geologic hazards is really a topic that came from our conversation with DLCD and on, Degami on changes there. There were some questions from the commission about what that entailed. And there were some items that I think got some focus on that we want to explain further. But again, that's the process. Are we good with that from you folks? Can you give me some kind of a thumbs up so that we know? And this slide comes up at the end, so we can maybe defer that, but that's kind of what we're thinking. Seen this slide many times, so it's really, this is just kind of sewer I&I and what it is. Our I&I program, it's not a new program, so it's been around. In 2014, we adopted the master plan. We spent a lot of time on the moratorium projects. It was interesting to hear that topic come up from you on your last subject. We focused pretty closely on the moratorium projects. I guess the main point here was that while that served the immediate problem, the intent was for us to carry on the rates that we were collecting for sewer moratorium projects. We still are collecting that revenue, and we are ready to move forward with the I&I program and continue that program. And that was the plan that was recommended in the master plan. So we're pretty focused on I&I right now. I guess the schedule here, you're familiar with the areas. We talked about these before. We are focused on Rivercrest. We just, are about to complete the Inflow project, which will take a lot of catch basins off the system, off the sewer system, and put them into the storm system. We are, now we're focused on I&I. With the I want to be super clear about this. We heard from the commission concern about this lateral policy that we originally brought to the commission in May of 2019, and then I think again in June of 2020, that we were really kind of excited about, because we thought, you know, just to get some of the I&I reduction factors that we were trying to get to in terms of our goal, we wanted to move forward with that. And we shared some funding strategies. And what we heard from the commission was, well, you know, we think we should have another partner at the table, and that should be Water Environment Services. And they're working towards coming up with some kind of a program. We're not exactly sure what that's going to look like yet, but there's some indicators that they're moving on that. So we just want to be clear, what we're proposing in 2021 is really not including the work on the private lateral. But these code changes have some language that focuses on a private lateral program, with the understanding that we really do need to get there with the city commission. And it's more a matter of, you know, what impacts does that have on our community and the folks who, you know, pay their rates, and the folks who maybe need special attention with regard to their lateral conditions, and what does that look like? So, you know, and I'll go over this more in the next slide, but what I really wanted to say about this is, one, we remain concerned about the likelihood that the condition of many private sewer laterals is resulting in I&I. We're certain about that. We know that there's laterals out there that are leaking like a sieve. We wanted to clarify that the code changes proposed strengthen our authority over private sewer laterals that are in disrepair. They do not authorize a private lateral replacement program. That would be followed by more guidelines and policy on how to deal with the private laterals, as well as some kind of a fee structure and how we would pay for that. So right now, these code changes kind of queue us up for that, but it's not a undone deal. When we bring forth a sewer line replacement program, along with determination of fees and charges, the code will be in place to support the private lateral replacement policy. So we feel like this sets the tone for a lot of other things that give us a little more authority on things, which I'll go over in the next slide. I really did want to avoid a deep dive, and we don't have time for it now anyway, but really the code changes that we're proposing clarify when a sewer connection is required. They tell us when the sewer must be connected to sewer versus connected to storm, right? So we've got a separated system. So we're clarifying that in these code revisions. We're defining expectations for laterals to be maintained in good condition. So that would be a property owner requirement. We're establishing that staff would have the right to enter the property for pipeline camera access. But yet we have also clarified, the Planning Commission was adamant about this, that we provide written notice and get permission before access. So we've included that in here. Similar to our drinking water code, the sewer rates section includes things for adopting a service lateral program. If we adopted it, the code would be there to do that. Also includes language on the financial assistance program. We have that already for water rates, and we actually apply that already to folks that struggle with paying their utility bills. And then there's clarity on the city's right to determine monthly sewer rates for properties outside of the city. And there's not a lot of this, but sometimes, like we've talked about annexations, they need to get connected to the sewer system, but the timeline for the annexation pushes that out. So in that interim period of time, we would charge them a higher sewer rate. And we do that with that language, again, is more clear in the water code than ours. But
goes too far.
Mhm.
Mr. Lewis, could I ask you a quick question before you get further? So you mentioned something about people being unable to pay. Could you just back up to that just a little bit?
So in our utility bill programs, if there's someone who has a challenge with their ability to pay those, there's a process by which they go through to have their utility rates deferred or reduced.
Good. That's what I thought you were talking about.
Yeah, this code change kind of helps supplement that.
That's good, because that's a good DEI policy.
we've strengthened the code, for instance, when a property owner fails to comply by using the same lien provisions we use when failure to comply with the water code. So that gives us a little more strength there if we need it. We include reference to the sanitary design standards as a guide for new public sewer infrastructure in these code changes, and we make it very clear that stormwater and groundwater are prohibited from entering the sanitary sewer system. And we address with more certainty about how to deal with existing multi-party lines. So that's needing something. So again, by amending the municipal code, this provides staff with the ability to implement the private lateral program. However, a program will not be implemented until a policy is adopted by the City Commission and the engineering fee schedule is adopted by the City Commission. And something to note, the proposed code amendment does not implement a fee for the program. However, it allows city to set the fee on commission approval. So we think that the code changes are straightforward when you read the red line version, and I suspect you have. So, you know, that's pretty much it for me. I just kind of wanted to come back to this slide, which is if I've answered your questions, or if I can answer your questions for the, during the remainder of this, we would take that and, package it with this chapter 1780 and bring it back for an ordinance reading on January 6th. That's it for me.
Clarifications?
Yeah, Commissioner Smith, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so, my concerns are, sometimes I have a hard time understanding which items are, tied to Wes and which ones aren't. So in this case with the code amendments, these are code amendments that are mostly being proposed by our staff for our needs within the city, not necessarily, under the whole umbrella of I&I, it does behoove the West to have us tackle these, but these are not changes that were coordinated or influenced or tied to West in any way. Is that correct?
Right. So, I kind of wanted to be way out in front of Wes. Sometimes it bothers me when Wes sets policy and then all of a sudden we have to follow that. I'd like to be on the not the bleeding edge, the leading edge, because a lot of other agencies are doing this. So I'd like to be out in front of that, setting the example, setting the standards. That's why I was excited about getting out in front of the lateral policy. But no, two things. One, I&I affects treatment, right? Obviously, if we send all that to the treatment plant, there's an impact there, which affects the region, and that's what Wes's point is. But for us, we fix these moratorium areas, and then there are some other areas that aren't in the same drainage basin as the moratorium areas. That between the moratorium areas, we didn't build those pipelines so big that we didn't have to deal with I&I. We still have to concern ourselves with reducing flows. If we don't, those leaky systems are going to get more leaky and they're going to exceed the capacity of the moratorium areas or some of those areas that we chose to defer because they weren't as immediate of a need back in 2015, right? So this is a collection system issue as much as it is a treatment plant issue.
So I just want to, when Wes develops the program and brings that program to us as a commission, we really start talking about that partnership or agreement or whatever. And right now it seems that they're leaning towards some sort of a grant process, which I have concerns about. Our main concern, or my main concern, is the equity between each of the agencies, and if it's a grant and this was talked about at our last West advisory meeting, I worry that if it's set up more as a grant program, that these individual cities go to West with proposals, and West ends up, or the county ends up selecting certain ones. It's not necessarily so that all of those grants would be granted, and that yet each of those cities would still be obligated to fix the I&I issues. So, and I'm also concerned about, individual agreements between other cities and not really knowing how that equates to what agreement they bring to us. And so those are concerns that when we get to that broader discussion of the program and partnership with West, that we're really going to have to spend some time with that, because I as you know, I have major concerns and worries about that.
Yeah, and you know, we've talked about this a little bit, Commissioner Smith. I agree with you. I'm a little bit frustrated by that. I think there is inequity. I'd rather see them reduce our rates and allow us to do our things. I really don't like the idea of having to rely on West for some kind of a grant program. That's why I was, again, advocating for self-funded programs. And, you know, if we're successful with that, then, you know, making the argument with West that our rates should be reduced.
Right.
But, you know, they've become the bigger animal, and it's become a little bit more challenging. And I really don't want to slow down our program that really we need to deal with, because if we don't, we're gonna see collection system failures soon.
Okay.
Okay, Commissioner McGriff?
Yeah, just some real quick things, John. I noticed through the document that you made this very gender neutral. 13.08.06 refers to he all over the place, where it doesn't refer to any he's or she's. There's one other spot where there's a reference to a he, which is 13.08.170. So you might want to make those gender neutral. One question I had, and doesn't have to be answered today, but you have the thing about the privies and closing those up. How do we make sure that those are done? That people actually infill their privies or septic tanks or whatever the heck they have? Is that something we go back and inspect?
Real quick on that, that's a element of the building permit.
Okay,
when
perfect.
They get their sewer connection.
Okay, perfect. Then on 13.08.190, I haven't heard anybody refer to anything as a tenement for a really long time. I don't know if we have a definition in our code somewhere else, because you talk about every tenement or lodging house. I don't think we have any tenements in Oregon City, but it just seemed a little antiquated term, so maybe that could be fixed. And then on 13.08.240, where you talk about D, you say historic building established. Do you mean built before the separation of sanitary and storms? Is that what you meant? Because you have established. I don't know what established means.
Well, you know, part of this is the challenge of, those historic areas where they may have a basement that's well below the sewer line or not accessible to the sewer line. So just kind of acknowledging that, so that we're still going to continue to try to.
So here's the question. So are you talking about built or established? Because I don't know what established means. So my house was built in 1912. I have a basement. You may need to be coming over and looking at that. So I know when my house was built. We have a general idea of when most of our historic buildings. I didn't want to change this to historic landmarks, because not everything is a landmark. So I don't know whether you want built before the separation.
So you mean for us we mean built, and for you saying sometimes they become established as historic homes later?
No, I'm asking you whether you want to say built instead of established. I don't know what established means.
Okay,
So I'm just making a suggestion to correct that. So that was it.
that's item D in 13.08.240, where it talks about historic buildings. It uses the word established, and I agree, it should be changed to built.
Yeah, I did cite this so he knew where I was talking about.
Did you get the specific sections that that Commissioner McGriff mentioned really quickly about the he and all that? Okay.
Yeah,
You said them really
We can
quickly.
update that.
Yeah, there's only two.
We weren't proposing a full code update, but, you know, gender kind of neutral, we can fix that. And tenancy and just kind of that older terminology we can fix.
Yeah, I do want you to know, when I read this, I applied a basic DEI lens to it, and I think it's good.
Okay. Commissioner O'Donnell?
I would simply say that although the tonight's document doesn't set fees or rates, it doesn't set penalties and such. I mean, I look at these different sections, 13.08.158, it does empower Public Works to assess a fee, not currently defined. 13.08.165 about the failure to comply. empowers, whoever it may be to impose, liens, fees, penalties, and whatever. It's kind of open-ended. I know it was designed to be that way tonight. I do want to agree with Commissioner Rocky Smith that if by improving our I&I situation, we reduce the gallons of effluent that West has to process, then we should be the beneficiaries of that. I mean, that gives them operating efficiencies. I don't want to be on some vague grant program. Let's talk about what kind of monies are you going to provide? And I don't like to leave things undefined, and that's the West way. So I'll pass that along to our representatives there and remain as silent as I can make myself be. Thanks.
Yeah, so Mr. Lewis, just one question that I have is there, the language says, you know, a couple of times when the sewer service falls into disrepair,
Yes.
is there any criteria or anything like that that is less discretionary as to when something falls into disrepair? I mean, is it?
Well, I mean, when something falls into disrepair, depending on what kind of failure that is, there's the property owner has an interest in fixing that. Our approach is when we're in the area doing our I&I evaluations, if we have a sewer lateral program and we find problems, our approach would be to work with the property owner to deal with those and have a fee structure for dealing with that. If we don't have a lateral program, there's still this requirement, and really it's not just our code requirement, there's plumbing requirement that system be watertight. We don't always know that. So, with some lateral inspections, we may see that. We may find those kind of conditions. And at that point in time, we'll have to work with the property owner to see that those repairs are made.
So is there a point, now granted, I don't know a ton about sewer systems. Is there a point in which it would be super obvious to the homeowner that their lateral is in disrepair?
That would be.
I mean, is it as simple as they can no longer flush their toilets and therefore they would realize they have no choice, but they need to repair something, and therefore it's pretty obvious to them that that there's a repair that's needed and the fee is going to be charged by Public Works so we can repair it. Like, you know what I mean? Like, is it that obvious?
Well, in that kind of a scenario where there's like a blockage, you can have kind of a blockage in newer pipelines as well, I suppose. But in that situation, they could do a point repair and fix it. In the scenarios that we're talking about, which is a scenario where we want to rehab the system and keep it water free or groundwater free, it would be more like a leaky pipe that may not necessarily be blocked. And at that point, it would be sharing with that property owner the results of our video inspections. Does that help?
Yeah, but in the direction that I was hoping you wouldn't go.
Yeah, I mean, unless the soils held the sewage spill to a point where, you started to smell it or feel it in the ground.
Mm-hmm.
The worst
Ground
case is if
beside
it just kept leaking down, right?
Right.
Leaching down through the soil, you would never know it, right?
Right.
Unless you did an inspection and you caught it through that. So I think every one of these is going to depend on the condition of the pipe and the impact that it has.
Yeah. I mean, I understand. My issue is it's like this discretionary, when does it fall into disrepair? And it's helpful if the homeowner is experiencing discomfort in this, disrepair situation to help, you know what I mean? So that when you're given a fee by Public Works to pay, that you understand, it's easy to make that connection of, well, yeah, I should pay that. Otherwise, you see what I mean?
Yeah, that's using logic. There was a house on John Adams that basically they had all their stuff turned off because of non-payment. They were just continuing to use the bathroom as it was. And believe me, there was a lot of discomfort, but they never reported it.
Yeah. Okay, Commissioner O'Donnell?
Yeah, both Commissioner Rachel Lyles Smith and I have focused on this 1308-165. It's a failure to comply and failure to pay the charges imposed by this chapter shall subject the user and premises to the collection and lien provisions. Are we saying that if there is a failure, that the city will intervene, conduct the repair, and then place a lien against the private property? Is that what we're saying?
That's what we would use if we had a lateral program, right?
Well, that's what
So
we did.
well, no, we haven't adopted a lateral program. The code has provisions for that, but really if we're proposing making those kind of moves, we're setting ourselves up for a future lateral program. It's really a matter of how we pay for that. And that's what needs to be resolved. I think the beauty of doing the lateral program that we were proposing was that it helped resolve that, right? It helped contribute to that. Mm-hmm. So we still want to get back to that. We still want to be able to do that. I think this concern about Wes not contributing has made this conversation more difficult for us. But we still think to do this program right, to be successful with I&I reduction, we need to deal with the laterals as well as the main lines. And so we're seeing these code changes as the first step. But the commission was concerned about kind of doing that immediately because there was this desire to see West participate. And we still think that that's going to happen. We're not sure whether we'll like it or not, but at least we'll be able to answer that question when they have a program in place that we can figure out whether we want or need or can use it or not.
I think the answer to your question, though, is still yes, right? That you could, failure to pay the charges could be a lien on private property.
Yes.
Yes.
Which
Yes.
we've used.
So for instance, if we did the, inspection of the lateral, or maybe we don't even have to do that. If we got the lateral open because we're working on the public side of it, and we know that, the local drainage system or the local their local rain drain system is, it's raining and we're just watching it pour out of the lateral, then we would probably, at that point in time, we would have to talk to engage that property owner, share with them our city code, and work with them to get that improved or repaired. Or disconnected, right? The roof drain disconnect system may be a problem. So yes, this does give the city more authority over those kinds of problems, whether it be groundwater or surface water.
Any other questions or feedback for Mr. Lewis on this redlined code that sounds like is going to come back to us for approval in January? Is that correct? Or December?
Yeah.
January 6th.
January.
Okay, yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Mr. Conkle, did you have a comment on the use of liens or how much that's not been used or?
No, it's
No,
just, it's a
okay.
tool that we have used through code enforcement.
Mhm.
Essentially dealing with nuisance properties.
The house on John Adams had liens because of everything.
Okay, so Mr. Lewis, I think you're good for tonight.
I did forget, what were the teal ones? The one at the top and the bottom are both teal.
What's the teal versus green versus yellow?
Again, I know yellow is not checked, but
So,
the checks are moving
yeah,
forward.
it's, checks are what we've kind of heard from the commission that says we don't think that's something that needs more discussion. And having
Okay.
this conversation about the sewer completes that one tonight.
Okay.
The
Yeah.
teal or cyan is the, those are the ones that would come on January 6th.
Okay.
Then the green ones would come later, but they'll be the next ones to be brought. There's 2 items in that list of green ones that need to come back for discussion. That's the long-term obstructions, so sidewalks and parklets, right? We're still bringing
Right.
that back.
Right.
There's some definitions that we want to discuss. Those 2 items still needed work. And so we're working on that and planning to bring that back to you. And then the last item is the geologic hazards. And I think the waiver process was kind of a big concern for that. So we're working on that and plan to bring that in later in January.
Okay, good.
All right, I think we're good on that item. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. City Manager, do you have a report?
At this point, I think we just maybe get into it with PrAC.
Yeah. Are there any pressing commission committee reports that we need to make before we pull in PrAC?
Nope.
Commissioner McGriff says no. Commissioner Smith?
No.
Commissioner O'Donnell? No. All right. And with that, I believe I need to adjourn this meeting and then we'll restart another meeting, correct? Okay, so this meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you.